All right. Well, today I want to jump into a message that I think it brings to a close in a good way this time we've been focused on prayer. You know, yesterday we ended our 21 days of prayer, and I hope that you all tracked with us and stuck with us, and that you felt like that also helped to take your prayer life to another level. But today I want to end it with something that's a little bit dangerous. I want to talk to you about some risky prayers. I want to talk to you today. Pastor Josh told us a story about Peter who prayed a risky prayer, and today I want to unpack with you some risky prayers because, you spent the last several weeks praying, and hopefully you've seen an improvement in your prayer life, but today is a marker in the sand. Today's a marker in the sand. It's a day to say, yeah, I'm going to go deeper. I'm going to go much further with God than maybe what I ever have before. And so we're going to take a look at that. But today we're going to take a look at this idea of risk. And risk, it's a part of life, isn't it? It's literally all around us every day. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., my wife and I will be jumping on an airplane. We're going to fly to Idaho, of all places. Never been there, but we're looking forward to our trip that direction. But that's a risky thing, especially for me, somebody who doesn't really like heights very well. Some of us are risk averse, aren't we? Some of us are like me. We don't like risk. In fact, we probably hate it if we're being honest. We like predictability. We like knowing the outcome before it happens. We like safety and comfort, and oftentimes those are our sources of happiness and contentment in life. And oftentimes people that are risk averse, if you're anything like me, when we're faced with risk, we run the other direction. We would rather be uncomfortable and inconvenienced running the other direction than to take a risk and go through a scenario that we have no idea of the outcome. So where are my risk averse people in the house? Anybody? Okay. Is that too risky for you to raise your hand? It's okay. I get it. I get it. But then on the other side of the coin, if we go to the other extreme, there are those of you that said, I'm a risk taker. I'm somebody that like risks. Instead of running away from risk, you actually run head on toward risk. You love thrill. You love the thrill of the unknown. If you like risk, if you're a risk taker, you love to look risk in the eye and show it who's boss. Risk takers, you're the ones that jump out of planes. I don't understand it. You are the ones that share the deepest part of your lives with other people, and you don't really think anything about it. Risk takers, you're the one that will jump on a new idea with reckless abandon. Risk takers. Risk takers believe that they need risk in their life or else life simply isn't worth living. Who are my risk takers? Yeah, you guys are bold. Yeah, all right. That's good. That's good. Now, my examples may be somewhat extreme, but I do want you to consider for just a moment, which one do you most closely connect with? Are you risk averse or are you a risk taker? And being either one, it doesn't mean that you don't fully recognize the possibility for disaster. Both risk averse and risk takers, you fully get what the risk involves. It doesn't mean that risk averse people are more in tune with what's at stake, as much as I'd like to think that. Every one of us, we look at risk in very similar ways. Being fully aware of what could go wrong if I attempted something that is risky. And you know what I love about God? What I love about God is that He doesn't view things in the same way that we view them. In fact, His Word tells us that His ways are not our ways. Whether it's money, or favor, or provision, for example, or risk, He views it way differently than we ever would or do. He doesn't look at risk, for example, and immediately begin thinking about all that could go wrong. In fact, He would closely connect risk with another word that we use regularly at church. He would connect the word risk with the word faith. Many times, the things that God asks us to do require faith. In other words, they involve very high amounts of risk for us. But what He knows, and what I hope that we'll find out today, is that when we do something risky for Him, the result is actually something amazing. It's actually something amazing rather than dangerous or hazardous to us. And when we take a step of faith, it can be crazy scary in the beginning, can't it? We go over to talk to our neighbor about Jesus. It can be scary. When we give in that missionary offering, even though we know we don't have the extra money, it can be scary. When we make the first move to reconcile that strained relationship, it can be scary. But listen, hear me. On the other side of risk, on the other side of a risk for God, there lies something that's beautiful. It's beautiful and it's amazing. And you know, as we round out our series on prayer, I want to take a look at a couple of verses in the book of John, found in John 14 in particular. Jesus, He says these words, He says, "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing. And they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it." What a promise. What a promise. Here we see that when we believe in Jesus, we will do even greater things than He did. Greater things. Doesn't that sound great? Doesn't that sound appealing? Isn't that what you desire for your life, to do greater things than Jesus did? Greater things. You know, greater things, it doesn't just mean coming to church on Sunday morning. It's not what He meant by greater things. Greater things than Jesus doesn't mean attending a small group every now and then. Greater things, it doesn't mean saying that we'll pray for someone who needs it. No. Greater things than Jesus means that we have at our disposal the very same power that Jesus had. At our disposal is the ability to impact this world in bigger and greater ways. In us is the potential to do amazing things for His kingdom that far surpass anything we could ever dream of. Isn't that great? Isn't that good news today? And you know, I think that in order for us to do greater things, I think the very first thing we should do is to position ourselves in prayer. I think we have to position ourselves in prayer in a way that allows the Holy Spirit to move in us and to move through us. In other words, and it's the big idea for today, in order to do greater things, our prayers must be audacious and risky. It starts with our prayer life. That's where it all begins. And listen, some of the prayers that we're going to cover today are scary. Some of the prayers that I'm going to cover with you today, they open us up for pain. Some of the prayers might be so risky that many of you just say, I can't pray that prayer. And that's okay. That's okay. It's your choice whether you choose to pray these. But what is inherent in these risky prayers, these dangerous prayers, these audacious prayers that we're going to cover today, is the fact that it paves the way for God's Spirit to work in us in such a way that we will have the opportunity, the regular opportunity, to do greater things than Jesus Himself did. And I think that's exciting. So if you'll journey with me a little bit further, here's the first risky prayer that I want to invite you to pray, and that's search me. Search me. It's a risky prayer. We see in Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24, it says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." What a scary prayer to pray. You know, I want us to get this prayer in our hearts just right off the bat. So will you say it out loud with me? Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. King David, he prayed this prayer after an attack where his motives were brought into question. He prayed this very prayer. when his motives were being questioned. And there's several significant parts to this prayer that I want to unpack with you really quickly. The first is this. He says, search my heart. Search my heart. It's the first thing that we see David say. It's the first part of his prayer. Why in the world would he say to God, search my heart? God knows our hearts. Why would he say, search my heart? Well, in Jeremiah, in the book of Jeremiah, we see that our heart is deceitful. Our heart is wicked, it says. In other words, our heart lies. None of us were born with a good heart. We say that about people, don't we? She's got a good heart. He's got a good heart. No, they don't. His heart and her heart are deceitful. We're born that way. We're born with deceit in our hearts. We are all liars. Isn't that great to know today? We are all liars. Welcome to the Journey Church, where I'm here to encourage you. We are all liars. And the truth about lying is that one of the most common times that we lie, you may say, I'm not a liar. I don't lie about stuff. One of the most common times that we lie that I think applies to all of us is to ourselves. We lie to ourselves. We do it all the time. We deceive ourselves. And we don't even know how bad we really do it. We lie and we say things, well, I don't eat that much. I'm not full of pride. I can't help it that I'm just better than everybody else. I don't lust. I just appreciate a nice figure. I'm not a gossip. I just tell other things so they can pray for all these people who are doing bad things. It's a risky prayer to pray, search my heart. Search my heart, O God. Look and see what's in there. It takes courage to pray that prayer, doesn't it? And listen, when you pray that prayer, God will show you things that are not pure in there. Not to be cruel. He won't point those things out in you to be cruel. He'll do it to bring you to a deeper level of intimacy with Him. To deepen your very relationship with Him. It's a risky prayer for sure, but it's one that will bring you so much closer to God. David here in Psalm, he moves on from that idea and he says, test my anxious thoughts. My anxious thoughts. Test me and know my very anxious thoughts. And what's another way to say anxious thoughts? Well, it's worry. It's worry. God, look in me for things that worry me. And can I just say that we are a worrying culture? Especially in the United States, we worry. We make worrying our jobs. God, look in me for the things that worry me. The things in me that make me anxious and afraid. So why is this a risky prayer? Because when we see the things that we worry about, the things that make us anxious, the things that we're afraid of, we will quickly realize that those are the very areas where we don't fully trust God. Those things that keep us up at night, those things that we worry about the most, those are the very areas where we trust God the least. And sometimes we don't even acknowledge them as worries and anxiety. We just dismiss them and we say, well, everybody worries about that. Think back to the last time you were afraid. Now, I'm not talking about spiders or snakes or the man that's behind the shower curtain every time you go in there in the middle of the night. He's there. But what makes you afraid? What makes you anxious? Are you afraid of losing your job? Are you afraid of not being married by a certain age? Are you afraid that your marriage will simply never get any better? Are you afraid of loss and losing somebody that you love so dear? What we fear the most reveals where we trust God the least. If I'm scared to death that my marriage isn't going to work, then I'm not trusting God with my marriage. If I'm afraid that I won't be able to pay my bills this week, then I'm not trusting God to be my provider. If I obsess about keeping my children safe, don't throw anything at me, but if I obsess about those things, then I'm not fully trusting God to keep my children safe. And whatever that fear is for you, whatever makes you the most anxious, whatever you worry about the most, those are the things that God will reveal to you when you pray, God, search me. You know, David, he lays out a perfect prayer for this one. Here's the last thing that we see in there. We see in David's prayer, him pray, God, show me my sin. Show me my sin. Talk about a tough prayer. God, show me. Find in me my sin. Show me the areas of my life where I'm simply missing the mark. Have you noticed that it's not very easy to see our own sins in the mirror? I mean, it's so easy to see it in everybody else, but in us, we struggle to see it. We tend to accuse other people and excuse ourselves. This can be a game-changing prayer for you. This can be a game changer when you give God permission to point out the very sin in your life that's dwelling in your heart and has probably been there far too long. Pray, God, search my heart, test me, know my anxious thoughts, and see if there's any offensive way. Man, that takes courage. But if you will pray that, if you will pray that very prayer, then you will see God open the door for you. God will be able to lead you better. And He'll be able to lead you more specifically in the way everlasting, towards something that has eternal value, towards something that lasts, not only a lifetime, but forever. So that's the first risky prayer, maybe the easiest of the three. God, search me. Search me. Have you prayed that prayer lately? If not, begin now. Here's the second one. Here's number 2. God, break me. God, break me. Now, this is probably the riskiest of the three. This is the one that brings the most potential for pain. It does not feel good, and most of you will not pray this prayer. This prayer is not consistent with the ideal of the God will always make your life better version of Christianity. It's not consistent with that thinking, that God will always make your life better when you become a Christian. This prayer, though, it does have the potential to open your heart to a work of God unlike anything you've possibly ever experienced before. We're going to look at 2 stories in the Bible to help us consider this idea of God, break me. The first, it happens in the book of Mark. And it's the story of a prostitute. And you know, I think it's important before we jump into the verses to understand what's going on in the life of this woman, the prostitute. To give us a little bit of context. You know, in the first century, nobody wanted to be a prostitute. It wasn't like somebody set the goal that by the time I'm 20, I want to be in the top 10% of all prostitutes. It didn't happen. That's not the thinking. In fact, usually it was because of the life that hand had dealt you that there was no other way to play the cards. That was the only option you had. And prostitutes were hated. They were hated by women and they were used by men. They were not people that were looked up to. In fact, they were looked down on. Then, one day in this story, this prostitute, she meets a man who treats her differently. A man who shows her honor and dignity and respect. And he loved her appropriately. And it transformed her life. And so, at this point in the story, she wanted to worship him. She wanted to give him back the honor that was due, the honor that he deserved. And in her most extravagant act of worship, she completely confused everybody else in the story. So Mark chapter 14, we'll pick it up. It says, while Jesus was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Now, this is the making of a very good joke. You know, we have a rabbi, a leper, and a prostitute walking into a... Never mind. And so what we have here is we have a story of this prostitute who takes this jar of perfume and she breaks it on the head. Not breaks it on the head, over the head of Jesus. That probably wouldn't have got her very far, would it? And this perfume, we find out later in the story, it's valued at 1 year's wage. Think about how much you make in 1 year. That's how expensive it was. That's how extravagant her act of worship was. A year's wage. And the thing to know is that back then, ordinary women didn't wear perfume. They couldn't afford it. It was far too expensive. The only women who would wear perfume back then were prostitutes. And so this prostitute, she saved up her money. She bought this jar of perfume so that she could signal to men who she was and what she did. And in reality, this jar of perfume was her income. Think about it for a minute. That jar of perfume was her way of marketing herself. It was her very source of income. But what did she do with the jar? She broke it and poured it out. She broke it and poured it out. She broke it and poured it out. And everybody there freaked out. They said, "No, you can't do that. No, don't do that. Let's take it and sell it, and then we'll take care of the poor with the money." They didn't get it. And let's be honest, if we were there, we wouldn't have gotten it either. As holy as we like to think we are, in that moment, we would have thought a very similar thing. What in the world is she doing? This act of worship, it was more extravagant than they could imagine. They couldn't wrap their minds around it. But all in that very moment, she was saying, "I'm leaving my past behind." She was giving to Jesus her past and her future. She was giving Jesus the most expensive thing that she had, broken and poured out. She was giving Jesus everything in that moment. That's the first story. Here's the second. It's Jesus' last meal, and he's gathered with his closest friends. He knows what's coming. He's getting ready to die on the cross. And so here's what it says. It says actually in Mark, I'm deviating from Luke so we can get a fuller picture here. As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. And then he broke it in pieces. What did he do with it? He broke it. And he gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take it, for this is my body." And he took a cup of wine and he gave thanks for it. He gave it to them and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice for many." It is what? Poured out. We see the same thing here, don't we? Broken and poured out. My body is broken and my blood is poured out. Jesus says, when you do this in remembrance of me. And everybody would agree that in that moment he's talking about the Lord's Supper. He's talking about communion. And that's good. That's okay. That is what he's talking about. But let me stretch you a little bit further. Maybe even stretch your theology a little bit. It certainly means that we should observe communion. We should do that in remembrance of him. But I think he's also saying in this moment that we should be broken and poured out for him. We should be broken and poured out for his glory. I mean, it's consistent with other scriptures we see. Broken and poured out. It's the prayer that says, "God, break me." I don't know if you've ever found yourself broken in the name of Jesus. If you've ever been broken and poured out for him. But I know I have. I'm thinking back to a number of years ago when I reached a low point in my life. It was a time that I'm not real proud of, but I almost lost everything. Everything that was important to me, all in an instant. I was broken, and I was sick. I was at my lowest point, feeling isolated and alone. I had tried to figure it out. I had tried to do it all on my own. But it left me alone. I was hurting in ways that I'd never hurt before. There was no clear way out. It was as if I was spiraling out of control. And everything I could think to do wasn't working. And the truth of it was that it was only getting worse. My feelings of loneliness and utter despair were growing. I couldn't do anything to stop it. I was broken. I wasn't hearing from God. He felt distant. He felt removed from my situation. And then it happened. I prayed words to God to affirm to Him that no matter how my circumstances turned out, I would serve Him. I wasn't going to give up on Him. I wasn't going to give up on what was most important to me. And I absolutely wasn't going to turn my back on Him. And in that moment, as those words were being prayed, as those words were leaving my mouth, I felt a change inside of me. God was suddenly closer than He had ever been. He was suddenly realer than He had ever been. He was alive in me, and I was alive in Him. But for me, it came from a place of brokenness. It came for me like the prostitute, where I had to say that I was no longer hanging on to my past. I was giving my future to Him. He was going to be God of my life, no matter what I went through, no matter how I felt, and no matter how hard it became to believe. And my relationship with Him deepened to a level that I had never experienced before. And I think that's because of my brokenness. And one of the most significant things that I've come to realize about brokenness is that we are best healed in community with one another. I found it true when I went through my brokenness. When I wanted to seclude myself and isolate myself, and I wanted to stop being involved in the church I was attending. The pastor there, he reached out to me, and he wouldn't let me not come to a small group. He knew what was going on in my life. He knew that I needed to be in community, and he was right. I mean, isn't it true that we impress others through our strengths, but we connect with others through our brokenness? When someone's really good at something, we're impressed. We think, man, I can't believe they did that. They're so good at that. And if somebody is too good at something, we can actually begin to resent them. Or not like them. We show off. I hate her. She's so perfect. She never has problems. She's so perfect. Until you find out she's got problems too. And you think, oh, I like her. Isn't that true? Oh, she's got problems too. I like her. She's like me. We got problems. Oh, she's insecure? Yeah, me too. I like that about you. Dr. Henry Cloud. If you're not familiar with him, you should look him up. He's a brilliant author, speaker, and psychologist. But he says that he's convinced that God made the tear ducts in our eyes on purpose. Of course He did. He made everything on purpose. But think about it for a minute. I mean, tears could come from anywhere. The nose, perhaps. Sometimes when you get to crying too hard, they do come out of your nose. Or maybe our ears. Maybe, why don't our tears come from our ears? Kind of weird to think about, isn't it? Pastor, where are you going with this? Hang in there. But I agree with Dr. Cloud. I think God designed for our tears to come out of our eyes on purpose, because He wants someone to look you in the eyes when you're hurting the most, so that you can feel their love. And the truth is, the painful truth, is that being broken isn't just a one-time event. I wish I could say that it is. But it's an ongoing brokenness that happens over and over to continually move us closer to God. Because listen, life's brokenness, life's greatest brokenness, it often leads to God's greatest blessings. A risky prayer. God, break me. God, break me. You ever prayed that prayer? If not, I want to encourage you to try it. Only if you're a risk taker. All right, here's the last one. This is the prayer that I call the prayer of availability. Can I be honest with you for just a minute? Can we be honest about our prayer lives, please? And I don't want this to sting or hurt in any way, but just know that I'm right here with you. But if we're being honest, don't we usually pray prayers that are focused on us and our needs most of the time? And they're good prayers. They're fine prayers. God, heal my grandmother. Help me to pay my bills. Bless my children. Of course, those are all great prayers. You should continue praying those prayers. But they're not very risky, are they? They don't have any risk in them. They're what I would call safe prayers. And we need those too. But a risky prayer, and the one that we're going to talk about now, is the prayer that says, God, what can I do for you? Not just God bless me, God keep me safe, but God, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. It's the prayer of availability. And listen, when you pray this prayer, God could direct you in a lot of different ways. God may call you to a different city. He may remind you of a calling that you had on your life years ago that you pushed back on. He may take you to a different job. He may tell you to stay where you're at even though you're sure you're supposed to move. He may even move you from being a cat person to being a dog person. Praise God. Must be a lot of cat lovers in the room, I'm sorry. Listen, I don't know what it will be when you pray this prayer, but I know that God will answer it every time. And it's the prayer that says, send to me. Send to me, God. You know, throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, we see that one of the ways that God works is to call His people. Right? We use that word in church, a calling, a call to do something for God. He prompts them, He moves them, He directs them in some way. God calls those who know Him to do something that He wants done. And what we see throughout Scripture is that there's kind of three responses to God's call. I want to rehearse them with you. Here's the first. It's the response that we see from the life of Jonah. In Jonah chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, it says, Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord. Jonah, he says, God, here I am, I'm not going. He ran. I wonder how many of us have had a similar experience. God has called you to do something, but you ran away. God prompted you to reach out to that neighbor in need, but you ran away. God told you to witness and share your testimony with that person, but you ran away. God directed you to serve in a ministry, and you said, Here I am, God, not today. This is my story. You've probably heard it. I was called to ministry in high school. And I shared my calling with my dad, who was my pastor, and he gave me the opportunity to preach, and I did it. But other than that, I ran. I ran from my calling. I went to college. I made tons of mistakes that I'm not proud of. But the biggest mistake that I've ever made is turning my back on that call. One of my biggest regrets to this day is turning my back on that call. I know I should. I know I'm called. God, here I am. Not today. Here's the second response that you can have when you pray the prayer, God, send me. It comes from Moses. It's the response of, here I am, God, send someone else. Send my brother. It's just not a good fit for me. It's a good fit for him. Exodus 3, 10 and 11. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Moses says, Who am I? I'm not a good fit. I'm not good enough. I'm not talented enough. Someone else would be better. And it's so easy to do that, isn't it? I'm not going to give. They should give. They have more money than I do. I don't have time. She's a stay-at-home mom. She has all the time in the world. Don't throw anything at me, stay-at-home moms. I'm just we think it all the time. They're better equipped. They've got more money. They've got more time. Here I am, God. Send someone else. Isaiah, he responds in this prayer in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. It says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said," Isaiah said, "Here I am, send me." See what he said? "Here I am, send me." Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, "Well, what's the climate? Well, where's it at? How much does it pay? What are the benefits?" No. He said, "Here I am, God. Send me." Pray this prayer this week, and you will see God direct you. Every morning, pray some version of this prayer. Pray that God would send you, that God would use you in any way that He wants and that He needs. Pray that prayer. Pray, "Here I am, God. I'm available. Here I am, God. You have permission to interrupt me. God, if you want me to go, I'll go. If you want me to stay, I will stay. If you want me to say something to someone, I will say it. If you want me to give something, I will give it. Whatever it is, send me." God will answer that prayer. He will direct you. He will prompt you. He will call you. He will use you. When you are available to God, He will answer that prayer. Scripture teaches us that when we draw near to God, He will draw near to us. And I believe that when we make ourselves available to God, when we seek His presence, we will more clearly hear from Him. We will realize more clearly what He is calling us to and toward. When you fully submit yourself to God, your hopes, your dreams, your will to God's will, you will discover Him on a deeper level and find that He has something greater in store for you. So that's the 3 risky prayers. Search me. Break me. Send me. They're not safe. They're risky. They come with risk. And I'm fully aware that some of you will simply choose to not pray any of those prayers, and that's okay. I'm not saying that you have to. But I am saying that if you want a faith that goes beyond where you find yourself today, and if you want to do greater things, these prayers will get you there. Up until this Sunday, we've been talking about safe prayers. But today, the rubber meets the road, doesn't it? That's why we're ending here, because I know these things aren't easy. But if you want to do greater things, it's the way to do it. And you know, as the worship team comes back up, I want to look at Isaiah chapter 6 with you. Because I think that we find there some instruction. You know, we just looked at verse 8, where we see Isaiah say, "Here I am, God, send me." But as hard as these prayers are to pray, I think there's some lessons here that we can all pick up on that will help us pray these prayers more boldly. So starting in verse 1, it says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of His robe filled the temple. Above Him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory.'" I think the first way to be able to boldly pray these prayers, especially if you've never tried it before, is to have a personal encounter with God. It's to find yourself in the very presence of God. And you know, this morning during our worship time, we were in the presence of God. But you know what? It's not enough. God can certainly work in that time, but you've got to find yourself there through the week too. So find yourself in the presence of God. That's what Isaiah found himself in. Where we see the words, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory." And then the second thing that we see in Isaiah's example here that I think is helpful to us. In verse 5 it says, "Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." In order to pray these risky prayers, we all have to identify the sin in our own lives. We have to be very real with ourselves and approach God, the very presence of God, with humility, understanding that we're not perfect, that there is sin in our lives that He needs to search us and find. So get in the presence of God. Invite Him to point out the sin in your life. And then lastly that we see here, it says in verse 6, then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. So once we're in the presence of God and we've admitted that we're sinful people, then we need to receive the grace that comes from Jesus Christ. The grace that atones for all of our sin. The grace that's extended freely to us, not because of anything we've done, but because He loved us that much. And so right now, I want to invite you to bow your heads and close your eyes. And I want to give you some space. Because for some of you, you feel a stirring that one of those prayers is a prayer you need to pray right now. Search me, break me, send me. And so I want to give you that space right now to be able to lift that prayer to God. And maybe you're not quite there yet. Maybe you're in a place where you say, you know what, God, I need your presence. I need your holy conviction. Not for condemnation's sake, but because I need more grace in my life. So right now, as the band, they're just playing an instrumental. I just want to give you that space right now to pray one of those prayers.